Welcome to episode 60 of the Princeton Podcast, produced by the podcast production team at HG Media, providing audio and video production services here in Princeton since 1999. In this episode, Mayor Mark Freda welcomes Kelley Nicholson-Flynn, head of school at Princeton Day School. During their conversation, Kelley describes her path from science research to education, with leadership roles at Lawrenceville School and Riverdale Country School shaping her approach. She shares her enthusiasm for Princeton Day School's mission, its focus on intellectual vitality, character development, and the importance of community and student well-being. The conversation also includes a description of Princeton Day School's rich history, dynamic programs, and exciting strategic plans for the future. So without any further introduction, let's join our host, Mark Freda, and his guest, Kelley Nicholson-Flynn, for episode 60 of the Princeton Podcast.
Kelley, thanks for joining us today.
So great to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah. So let's get to my first question. How has your experience as head of school at PDS been so far?
It's been great. I am so happy to be back in Princeton, and I love Princeton Day School, and I'm so happy to be part of this community. I have been warmly welcomed by not only the families in our community, but also my amazing faculty, school leaders, and different folks from across the town. And I just feel so lucky to be in Princeton because it's a really special place.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It is a great place. So what attracted you to this position at PDS?
Yeah. So I have had two jobs in education previously, and I was happy at both of those jobs. So I'm definitely the kind of person who moves towards something and not away from something. And when the position statement came out about the head of school at Princeton Day School, 5 separate people contacted me and said, you know what, this is the place for you. Huh. And some of them were former employees at the school. Some of them were alumni and people I've come across in different parts of my professional experience. And I think they saw something in the school and saw something in me that matched. And I think the way I would describe that is that it's a place that leads intellectually and academically, but also has so much more to offer and really thinks about the education of a student very broadly. What does it look like to help a student develop personally? And then also, how can experiences outside the classroom contribute to the educational program? And those are all things that I've paid attention to at different points in my career. And so I think they were right. They said, you should apply, and I did. It's the only place I applied, and I think we found a match.
Oh, that's great to hear. So let me ask you just a few things about you, right? So people understand who you are. Did you grow up in New Jersey?
I did not grow up in New Jersey. I am a proud Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania native, Steelers fan and all of that. However, I have been in New Jersey or New York since I graduated from college. My husband grew up in New Jersey, Monmouth County. And so after college, when I moved here to be with him, as he would say, I've been in New Jersey longer than I ever was in Pittsburgh or in Pennsylvania. So it feels very much like home now.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So could you share your teaching and leadership roles prior to coming to Princeton Day School?
Sure. My first job teaching in an independent school was at the Lawrenceville School. I started in 1998, and I was there for 14 years. I, worked at the school teaching biology, chemistry, a little bit of physics. I was science department chair and also interdisciplinary program chair. And you'll see that idea of interdisciplinary education as a theme throughout my experiences. After finishing up with those chair positions, I was the coordinator of teaching and learning programs. So worked both with faculty on professional development in addition to working with students. I left there in 2012 and I moved to Riverdale Country School in New York City, where I was the head of upper school, which means the principal of the high school. And I did that for 8 years and then moved on to a different leadership role, which was the assistant head of school for operations. That happened in February of 2020. So as you can imagine, that pretty quickly turned into how do we keep school open through COVID. But it was a wonderful experience for me learning about other parts of the educational experience in a school. And so I was there for 11 years and then came here to PDS starting in 2023. And there's one other institution that's been very much a part of my experience, which is the Klingenstein Center for Independent School Education, which is part of Columbia's Teachers College. And I have worked with them for about 20 years of my professional life, working on developing young teachers in a program called the Klingenstein Summer Institute, and also developing leaders through a master's program, and also the summer program called Forge, which is about developing leadership skills in sort of mid-level managers in schools.
Yeah, your background is very impressive, and so some of my questions are aimed at that, because I want people to understand exactly, how qualified you are to be here. It's amazing. So let me just talk a little bit about how would the student experience at Riverdale be different than that at Princeton Day School?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of things that are the same between Riverdale and PDS, in that they're both pre-K through 12 all-gender day schools. And just that simple explanation puts a lot of things in common. Of course, the location is incredibly different. And going to school in New York City, there's just a lot more influences on you. I don't want to say there's more social pressures, but it's a different kind of social pressure because there's just so much more going on.
Yeah.
Of course, most of the students there also traveled to school. It was not like a neighborhood school, which some of the New York City independent schools are. And you had the opportunity to interact with New York City in a way outside the classroom, field trips, et cetera. And that, there's just a lot going on, which is both good and bad. I think that you can probably imagine what I mean by that. At PDS, of course, our students also travel to campus from quite a distance. We've got lots of students from Princeton and surrounding suburbs, but we have students coming from as far away as Philadelphia or from Bayonne, New Jersey. So similar in that it draws from quite a distance. There is just such a breath you can take when you're in Princeton, New Jersey. That's a lot harder to in New York City. We just have a lot more space. Yeah. Instead of 20 acres for more students, we've got 106 acres. And then even the way we use our spaces indoors and outdoors on campus, there's just so much opportunity to take a breath. One of the things I'd really like to work on at PDS, though, is having that same kind of connection to your local environment that we had in New York City. And so I've been very interested in meeting, academic and educational leaders in the community, nonprofit leaders, but also folks who are working in industry around here, and yourself, Mark.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of similar, but a little different. So as a teacher, how is the experience at Lawrenceville School different than the experience as a teacher at PDS?
Yeah. Extremely different. Huh. As you could imagine, working at a boarding school and working at a day school are incredibly different.
Yeah.
At a boarding school, they call it the triple threat. You teach, you coach, and you are involved in the boarding experience for the students in one way or another. I myself lived in a dorm for a couple of years. And so you're all things to those kids. They call it in loco parentis. You have to make decisions that are beyond what a teacher would make at a different type of school. At PDS, we are still interested and involved in all aspects of students' lives, but they go home to their families at the end of the day. Which is, in my opinion, because I've chosen to work in day schools, something that I prefer in terms of an educational model. We talk a lot about the sort of triangle. We've got the student, we've got the school, and we've got the family, and we need to work in partnership with each other on behalf of the students. But many teachers at PDS are also coaches, and we think that's a really powerful model. And we're involved with students outside the school day. If you are coaching a student in mock trial, for example, that was taking place all throughout spring break here. So the teachers are, off campus and with our students all over the place. One other difference is that at a day school, sometimes things can feel, this is counterintuitive, things can feel like they're happening at a faster pace. And I think the reason is because we're trying to take all the things you used to do at a boarding school between 8 a.m. and, 10 p.m. and jam it into fewer hours so that they go home to their families. And one of the things I've really appreciated about PDS is, especially for our older students, how we've helped to manage the schedule and the calendar so that they have some type of balance in their lives.
Yeah, that balance is pretty important. All right, let's talk about your personal educational track. I found it pretty impressive. So let's start with your undergrad and grad choices. How did those come about?
Yeah. So when I was growing up in Pittsburgh, I went to a wonderful public school and definitely was a science and math person. And so I imagined what I wanted to do with my life was to become a doctor. My sister had diabetes, and I remember the frustration, and I continue to feel the frustration of how hard it is to manage a chronic disease like that. And so I thought, that's what I want to do with my life. My purpose is to improve the condition of my sister or someone like her. And so I went to Bucknell University, where I studied biology, and I loved it. And somewhere along the line, I was involved in research and realized that was also super fun. And you could get into research sooner than you could get into the clinical work of being a physician. And so I changed my tack a little bit from medicine into research. And so when I graduated from Bucknell, I went to Johns Hopkins University, where I worked as a lab technician, so was involved in research right off the bat there, and also went to school in the evening, where I studied actually environmental science. I've always had very much a purpose-driven life, and thinking about how can you, at first it was how can you contribute to the health field, and then shifting a little bit more to the environment and our natural world. And I loved both of those experiences so much that I applied to graduate school for the PhD. And at that time, that's when I ended up in New Jersey to be with my then partner, now spouse, Greg. And I came to Rutgers and UMDNJ. And you'll see from both the master's degree at Johns Hopkins and the PhD degree that I've always been involved in interdisciplinary studies, whether it's science and humanities or different aspects of science. And so the joint degree between our UMDNJ and Rutgers afforded me that opportunity. And I was there for, 4+ years doing coursework and also doing my research, and loved it, and was actually in the process of finding my postdoc position. And at the very end, I was allowed to teach. It turns out I had a fellowship that prevented me from teaching, because lots of graduate students teach so much that they never finish their degree. And so they prevented you from teaching. And I had the opportunity in my last semester to be a TA for a histology course for medical students. And I realized that was the best part of every day, was being with the students, but also thinking about how do you design experiences where they can learn. And I'm glad I listened to myself at that point and said, maybe I should look into this teaching thing. And I looked into first public school teaching. And then when I broke the news to my PhD advisors, one of them said, you should look into independent schools, because I think you'd be really happy there in terms of the types of programs that you'd be able to create. And she was absolutely right. And I sent a cold resume to somebody at Lawrenceville and said, these are the kinds of things I'd like to do. And they saw enough promise in me to give someone who really didn't have much teaching experience a chance.
Well, the journey is always amazing when you ask people about it.
Yeah. And I feel so lucky now to have a science background for a couple of different reasons. One, I mentioned the work with the Klingenstein Center, and I was able to work on teaching, aspiring teachers what we know about how people learn. So really taught myself a lot about the cognitive science of that. And then the other thing in terms of working at a school or running a school, to be a scientist is to be a systems thinker and to be looking for evidence for whatever conclusions or claims you're making about the best educational opportunities. And it's just really benefited me in terms of my way of looking at education.
Yeah. So I know earlier you mentioned that PDS is K to 12, but so how's that broken out? I mean, how do you split? Anyway, I'll stop asking detail. Tell me.
Yep. So PDS has just under 1,000 students, about 970, and we are pre-K through 12. The lower school goes from pre-K to grade 4, middle school from 5 to 8, and then high school from 9 to 12. We start very small with 1 or 2 pre-K classrooms, moving up to 3 sections of each grade in the lower school. So very intentionally small. So there's a lot of meaningful, teacher-student relationships, et cetera. And then we add more students in the middle school and add even more students in the upper school. So the graduating classes are about 105 or so in the upper school.
Okay. What would you say are the most valuable parts of a PDS education?
Yeah. So I think the thing that pops the most to me when I speak with folks in the community and alumni from the community is that it's a place of true intellectual vitality. And what I mean by that is there's people at PDS, people who join and then people who graduate from there, they have a life of the mind. They are critical thinkers and creative thinkers. There are folks who are engaged in learning from other people. For example, we have put together this year a statement on civil discourse. Which is, so the two of us are engaging in dialogue. How can I say what I think, but also be open to letting you say what you think? And that we can both benefit from each other's thinking. That idea of intellectual vibrancy and vitality is really core to a PDS education. A second thing I would say is that strength of character is something that I think the school does incredibly well. This past year, we did a survey of our families, and through that we saw what were we doing well and what do our folks want us to improve on. A strength of character is something that I think people were commenting on how well we did it, and that our families want us to continue leaning into this. So living your life with integrity according to principles or developing resilience, that idea of strength of character is something that's really important to us. Our community, and I think this is true for lots of different schools, but I think it's extremely special at PDS. The community is a place of compassion and kindness, and also a place of shared responsibility and joy. And so compassion and kindness, you notice it when you walk onto the campus. You could sit down at a table in the dining center, and kids would talk to you, and faculty would talk to you, and they'd want to learn more about you. Shared responsibility. There's a reason why we don't go to school alone. We go to school with other people, and it's because through that collaboration and being together, we build beyond where we could build individually. And there's also like a hard aspect of that, which is I need everybody in the community to be accountable to each other. And it is a happy and joyful place. I've visited many schools around the country, and you can get a vibe at a school pretty quickly. And all you have to do is come and listen to our little guys on the playground, or listen to our big students outside on their own version of a playground playing spike ball or lacrosse or something like that. And you'll hear a lot of joy from folks in the community. And the last thing I think I'd like to mention is this idea of stewardship. So stewardship for yourself. How do you take care of yourself? How do you take care of community, both locally and across communities around the world, and the natural environment? This takes place through, thinking about physical and mental health, thinking about how do we engage with each other in community, but also how do we care for the natural world? We have an incredibly strong sustainability program. For example, every day students participate in composting. We have reduced our waste by an incredible amount by turning it back into a valuable resource for the earth. And also acts of service, right? Lots of places in Princeton and the surrounding communities, whether it's students who are functioning as EMTs or contributing to the Arts Council, there's a true sense of being able to give back to your community. So I think that explains what the goals are and what people take away from the education at PDS.
Yeah. So one thing I think most people, at least most people that are local, that have been here for any length of time, would think I was remiss if I did not ask you to talk a little bit about the origins of PDS and the schools that it came from.
Thank you so much for asking. It's a really special year for PDS and its founding schools. So Miss Fine School was founded in 1899, and it was a school for girls, pre-K through 12. And the more we've read about it and studied it this year, it's almost a radical idea that there should be a school for girls and women that has academic excellence to the level of what we see in PDS today. And in fact, we get lots of current ideas and initiatives from Ms. Fines. So, for example, gardening and stewardship, something that still exists on the campus today, was a core part of the program back as far back as 1899. Likewise, our contributions to athletics and the arts on campus with each other and outside the school, very much present in that school. And actually, our motto that we are going to start using a little bit more often, always shine, comes from Ms. Fines. And always shine doesn't mean like you always have to be perfect or always be on, but it's about light and about how sometimes we light the way for other people and other times people are illuminating journeys for us. And of course, the second founding school is Princeton Day School, PCD, which was founded in 1924. So is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. Just like Ms. Fines has a tradition of academic excellence, athletics and the arts, but we also get some of our traditions from PCD. So, for example, we have a field day each year, pre-K through 12, blue and white day. You have to come and visit sometime to see people who love their school and are competing against each other in a way that brings true joy to the community. And then also some of our programs like hockey date back to Princeton Country Day, and hockey is alive and well at PDS today. And just to give a plug for our girls varsity ice hockey team, who just won the state championships at the Prudential Center a couple of weeks ago. They are students who obviously experienced joy, but also demonstrated true strength of character.
Thanks. Yeah, earlier you had mentioned that, the teachers also, some of them fill roles as coaches. So I imagine that's more than just sporting coaches, and there's all sorts of options for the students to do activities other than just their schoolwork. Are there any of those things you could highlight or just mention some of the more popular ones?
Sure. In the middle school, there's a program that's called Da Vinci. And so it's a period once a cycle where students can explore something that is totally new or totally different to them. Anything from creative writing to, they might be running around playing ultimate frisbee or doing something like crime scene investigation and learning how you might collect evidence in order to make a conclusion about a crime. In the upper school, we have more clubs than anyone could ever participate in. Everything from ones that celebrate different affinities at the school. We've got a bunch of different affinity groups like Black Student Association, APITA, which celebrates folks with Asian backgrounds. And then we have, clubs like Enact that learn about sustainability and bring in speakers and things like that. And then other types of competitions. So, for example, I mentioned mock trial. There is a statewide competition in mock trial, and I had the opportunity to visit our team recently and watch them, do cross-examinations and question witnesses and things like that. And they had faculty members who were their coaches, but also had past parents and alumni who were their coaches, people who are or have been practicing lawyers. And it was incredible to watch the mentorship of these incredibly talented students.
Kelley, you've shared a lot of great information about PDS with us. So if I'm listening to this and I say, geez, I should be having my child go to PDS, how do I apply? How hard or easy is that?
So we would love to have you come to campus and speak with us about potentially joining PDS. Though we have entry points at pre-K, KM1, 5 and 6, and grade 9, we do admit a handful of students at every grade level because sometimes people relocate, et cetera. So please contact our admissions office if you're interested. And there are parts of the application that come from a parent, parts that come from the student. And we take a look, of course, at transcripts and test scores depending on the age of the student, and also have students come for an interview and in many cases, a group experience where they can get to know other students at PDS to see whether or not it's a good fit for them.
Okay. What next steps for PDS or future plans that you might know of or hoping for? Or
Yeah. So I arrived last year. And so after doing my best getting to know the community and getting to know the school, we engaged in a strategic planning process that'll take about 18 months. The first 6 months was working on our mission, vision, and values. And so those will be released to our community on April 15th. And so we have had an amazing mission, and it's not a change in direction. It's really a crystallizing of what those mission, vision, values are, so that we can continue to operationalize them in the best way we can. And then we've already started on the next phase of strategic planning, which is to analyze our community and say, what are we better than anyone else in the world at, and make sure that we continue to strengthen and leverage that. What are the opportunities that are out there in the future in education, but also very specifically related to our location in Princeton, New Jersey, and how can we take better advantage of that? And so the things that you can anticipate are strengthening and perhaps introducing new programs. There may be some facilities work that we do, but that'll come through an analysis through this strategic planning process.
so now on the other end, I mean, I know a lot of people in town are alumni of PDS.
Yeah.
So I imagine you've met a number of alumni, and I guess meeting alumni is one way to kind of identify what it is like to go through PDS. But can you share like some of the, I don't know, either stories or whatever about some of the alumni you've met and chatted with?
Sure. I love meeting alumni. And the funniest thing is that I walk around almost always with a PDS hat or coat or something. And people stop me all the time and say, oh, what's your association with PDS? And then when I say I'm head of school, the stories just pour out of them. So a couple of themes or stories that have come through my conversations with alumni have helped me really work with the community to try to define the school the best that we can. One is that it's a place of high challenge and high support. It's a school where both in the classroom and outside the classroom, we have high expectations of students. We really want them to grow beyond what they think they can. And so that may be providing them with an academic opportunity inside the classroom that at first they think, oh my goodness, I can't do this. But then the real special sauce in PDS is providing the support to empower that student to achieve that goal that we had introduced or offered. So one story that I really love telling is a student who graduated in the mid-2000s, and she was working on an essay, and she had a first draft, and she handed it into the teacher, who said, you know what, this is really good, but I think you can do better. Here are 2 or 3 questions that I have for you. She went, revised, turned it back. He said, you know what, this is better. You listened to the questions that I have for you. You listened to the feedback, but I still think you can do even better. And so tearing her hair out and gnashing her teeth, she said, all right, and sat down and really tore the paper apart and rebuilt it to do her best to respond to that feedback and turned it in. And the teacher, what he said back to her, it said, you know what, if you're ever in a position in your life where you're struggling, please call me, because I'll remind you that you can do hard things. And a second story along those same lines is that an alum who was, we call them lifers, right? They come in pre-K, K or 1, and graduate from the school. So this student was in graduate school, currently studying some type of engineering. And he said, you know what makes PDS so special is that it's a school that took me seriously from the time when I was 4 years old until the day I graduated, and continues to take me seriously today. And so I look through that lens all the time at school, and I think, what does it mean to take a 4-year-old seriously? And it's giving them directions about what they're going to do with the task, and then trusting that they can follow those directions. Or when they're telling you a story at the beginning of the day during morning meeting, providing them the opportunity to listen to them. For a middle schooler, it might come through, some of them are doing podcasts right now on social justice. And so they have a question that they really want to explore, and they go out there and talk to different members of the community about that idea. I had a couple of students interviewing me about just being a woman in science, a woman in leadership. And that idea that my question is important enough that adults are going to spend their time talking to me. I love that idea of taking kids seriously. And then, of course, as they get older, some of our courses are designed where they're designed around the students' questions. So, for example, we have a program called REX, which stands for research experience. And 11th graders take this course, and they study some aspect of science, biology, chemistry, computer science, et cetera. They come up with their own questions. They identify the literature that they need to read and understand in order to be able to make meaning of it. They design laboratory or investigation investigations and ultimately end up working in a university lab. And they often generate knowledge that the teacher themselves does not have. So this idea of taking students seriously at all ages, I think, is completely true to PDS today. And then I guess the last thing that I'll say is I'm thinking of two alumni right now who are from the early 90s. And I said, how did you end up at PDS? Tell me your PDS story. And they both said, you know what, my parents didn't know much about the independent schools in the area, but they had heard that PDS was the best. And so that's why we went there. And they said, of course, I had this amazing academic experience, but there was so much more to my experience than just that. It was being cared for by the community and having opportunities to participate in so many different things beyond the classroom, whether it's athletics or on the stage. And I look at what those folks are doing now professionally, working in health sciences, working in politics and media. And boy, I couldn't be any prouder that idea of being the best led to them being the best in their lives.
Great. Kelley, thank you very much. I appreciate your time today.
Mark, thank you so much for this opportunity. And it's really great to speak with you and get to know you better.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the 60th episode of the Princeton Podcast, produced by the podcast production team at HG Media. If you enjoyed this episode of the Princeton Podcast, please share it with your friends. Visit our website at princetonpodcast.com. And be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Audible, or wherever you listen to podcasts.